Hello and welcome back to the channel, and we are finally getting around to year wrap-up videos. So today we wanted to talk about all of our favorite movies from 2018, and we are going to do it in a top 5 battle style. If you've never seen a top 5 battle, we make 2 separate lists. We do not share our lists with each other until we speak about it on camera. So it's a surprise to both of us. It's a fun time, and then you guys get to decide in the comments whose list was better or who you agree with most.
Keep in mind that these are the movies that we have seen this year, so we're not talking about all the movies that released this last year, only the ones that we actually got to see. Now, we're not going to take the time to put a whole list of them all the way up there, but if you've been around the channel, we have put most of the ones we've seen up-ish. At least the major ones, I feel like. The ones we really liked. So, without further ado, let's kick it off. I'll start off with the number 5, and my number 5 for this year was Love, Simon.
Oh, that's a good one. I did really like that one this year.
Yeah, I really liked it. I felt like it was just a very enjoyable teen movie. It was kind of a tier above what I feel like we normally get, and it's always great to have some LGBT representation in media, which this year was actually a pretty good year for, movie-wise, but I think that was my favorite that we saw.
It was also a very faithful adaptation of the book. If you have read the book and haven't seen the movie, or if you've seen the movie and are interested in reading the book, I really do recommend. So for my number 5 pick, I'm going to go with A Quiet Place. I think this was probably my favorite horror film from this year, and it's definitely in like my top tier list if I were to make a horror list. Maybe I should do that. But I just think it was an excellent horror film. I think I guess it wasn't technically a directorial debut, but I think it was like his first major film debut. I think it was really good, especially for that genre, and I think that the husband-wife duo team worked really well in this. I think sometimes that can get a little sticky in Hollywood, and it was phenomenal, and I really liked the hook of the horror and how it played out at the end. It was just great.
Good choice.
So now kicking off with our number 4 slots, I'm going to go with Bad Times at the El Royale. This was a huge surprise for me this year. I mean, when we first saw the trailers for it, I was like, I don't understand what this is about, but I'm intrigued, and it's Drew Goddard, and I really like him, and it was just amazing. Blew all of my expectations out the window, whatever little expectations I had, and it was just one of the biggest surprises from this year, and I really loved it.
My number 4 pick for this year was Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Now, I just really enjoyed this one. I feel like we saw it more recently, so I may be a little bit biased, but it was probably my favorite animated film to come out this year, and I was just very impressed with what they did with my personal favorite superhero, and it was just a blast the whole way through, so I want to put on my list. And for my number 3 pick, I'm going to keep the Marvel train going and say that Marvel's Avengers Infinity War was my number 3 pick for this year. I think that I've been hyped for this movie for like 20 years now, as whenever Iron Man 1 came out and they were building up to it, and I really felt like this movie delivered, and it was a lot of fun.
My number 3 pick, I am going with Annihilation. I really like heavy, heady sci-fi, and this was just absolutely phenomenal, and it's just one of those movies that you walk away from being like, what the F did I just watch? But I love those, and I love that it was a female-led sci-fi film, and I think that all of the different elements put into it were just like my bread and butter, and I really, really loved it.
It was just a really interesting movie. It was great. Good choice.
Kicking off our number 2 picks, we're getting into our top couple slots here. I am going with Avengers Infinity War. I am actually shocked that this was not higher on your list.
I felt like it would be too stereotypical to put it higher on my list, and while I really loved it, I don't know, I feel like I had to really think about what I wanted out of my movies this year.
Well, I think that this was just probably one of the best superhero films I've ever seen. I think that the way they balanced all of the characters and storylines in this film were practically flawless, and it just held up as a movie, let alone a superhero movie, and I just was blown away, and it's a movie that I could watch over and over and over again, and so it's definitely had to be on my top couple picks.
So my number 2 pick is actually The Bad Times at the El Royale.
Oh.
So I slotted this at number 2 because I felt like it was just a very fresh, interesting movie. And like you said earlier, this movie took me by surprise, and I really was just very involved the whole way through the movie. And I think it's pretty underrated. I felt like it didn't get as much hype as I thought it should have, and I would consider it like a Tarantino, but better. for the things that I want out of a Tarantino film. Fight me in the comments, but
I agree.
it was just a lot of fun. It didn't necessarily have to push the limits in the areas where Tarantino films sometimes feel they need to go, while still delivering a very interesting story with lots of twists and turns. And it's so fun to try and pick up on the details and figure it out as you're going. It's just what I want out of a movie-going experience. So before we go into our number 1 picks, we're actually going to do some honorable mentions because there was a lot of good movies this year. And for my honorable mentions, I had 2 that almost made my list, but I couldn't quite find a place to fit them in. And the first one was A Quiet Place, which she said everything there was to say about that one. It's good. And my other one was The Hate You Give, which I thought was a really enjoyable film and had a solid message behind it. And I also think that one was pretty underrated in terms of the attention it got from people.
Also another one that is a great book adaptation, and I highly recommend the book. So I actually have 3 honorable mentions, which I had to heavily cut down to because I could have very easily made a top 10 film best films of the year list. So I'm in no particular order on these ones. Revenge was one of them. I think that this was such an interesting revenge storyline, and I thought that the cinematography and the direction was really unique, and I really liked the performances, and I just was blown away by it and didn't expect anything out of it, and just really, really ended up liking it. And then one of my other picks is Black Panther, which I can't believe that came out in 2018. It feels like it came out like 5 years ago. But it's a great movie. I think it's definitely a fantastic superhero film, let alone a normal film, if you were to say that. And it was just definitely one of the better Marvel films I've ever seen. We had a lot of good superhero films this year.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then my last one was Love, Simon.
Okay.
Really, really liked it. A couple scenes in that movie make me cry. It's a great book adaptation, all the things we already said. And now we are down to our number 1 picks. This is our absolutely favorite film of the year out of all of them that we saw. So my number 1 pick is actually going to be Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Oh, wow.
I think that this did what Infinity War does, where it combines a whole bunch of groups of people and a lot of storylines really well and balances them really well. And then it just took it like 5 steps further. It speaks to teens in a way that's incredible. I think that the messages in it were great, and I think that I'm just amazed by how they blended so many things in that film. And we mentioned in our review how much they paid homage to the original comics and a lot of Easter eggs in there without losing the audience members who wouldn't understand those Easter eggs. And the animation style, the performances, just all of it was like a 10 out of 10 for me. And it may be because it was the most recent film we saw besides Aquaman, but I just think it's probably one of the best films to come out this year.
So for my number 1 pick, I actually ended up picking Annihilation.
Wow!
And so we saw this one at the beginning of the year, and as I was thinking about my list, I decided to put this one at number 1 because I just felt like it did something that a lot of films don't do anymore in terms of they weren't afraid to go over your head a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
But in a good way. And I really like how many limits I feel like this film pushed in terms of like treating the audience like they're smart, and then also being willing to put so much on screen that you're not expected to really figure it out. And it becomes this experience that is just really fun to try and like figure out what's going on and to create your own ideas based on the information the movie gives you. But the movie is also willing to say, I'm not going to give you the final answer, and you're going to have to like let that one sit with you. And it ends up being an experience that then you end up thinking about that movie later. And I think there's been several times this year where afterwards I was like, man, that movie was such a trip. And thinking about like everything that happened in that film, and ends up being a really enjoyable movie experience and one I want more of. And that's why it ended up being in my number 1 slot compared to some of the movies that I don't think came back in my brain as much this year.
That film also has one of my favorite horror scenes of all times. It's not necessarily a horror film, but it has this one scene that's just phenomenal, and any of you have seen it know what I'm talking about. And that concludes our top 5 battle lists of 2018 movies that we personally saw and our personal enjoyment opinions about them. Keep in mind that these are opinions, these are not law. If you didn't like some of these films, we're not telling you that you're wrong, and if you thought some of these should have been higher, great. Opinions are awesome. We love to hear them. But let us know whose list you like best in the comments. We'd love to know.
And also leave us your list of your top movies of the year. If we left one off or let us know, because if we haven't seen it, maybe we'll go check it out. If you tell us, we do read every single comment that comes in. And make sure you leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. It really helps us out and helps us know what kind of content you guys like to see. And hit that subscribe button. We have a lot more videos coming for you in 2019, and we want you guys to be here to see them.
And our worst list is coming next.
And our worst list is coming next, and that one's going to be extra fun. But like we said, stay tuned. You guys can check out those other videos, and we'll see you next time.